Hello and welcome to Open Minds UFO Radio. This is your host Alejandro Rojas, and I am here with Martin Digi Willis.
Digi, wow.
Digi, it's kind of like digital because you're like this online digital dude.
Yeah,
what'd you call yourself?
Failure.
Oh, come on.
Techno failure.
Oh, jeez.
We can talk more about that later.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you're talking about, of course, is there were some technical difficulties with your interview recently with Luis Elizondo, but those are fixed now, and we'll get into that. But I do want to introduce the show to people who haven't listened before, and we are getting lots of new listeners, Martin. This is exciting.
Yeah.
But we cover credible UFO news in a journalistic manner, so we looked at the substantiated, credible information, and we do look at some of the speculation, but we let you know if it's speculation. Whereas, in this field, there's tons of crazy speculation that is kind of, sold as gospel, but there's a lot we don't know, but we're looking into that, and there's a lot more substantiated information these days. It's an incredible time for credible information in this field. But we also review the news, the headlines in the story at the beginning of the show, and then we'll be doing that in a second. That will be this first segment, and then the last two segments will be our guests. However, we do have guests as opposed to just one guest on the show. So this is really exciting. We've got a bunch of guys who have been following all of this whole unidentified television show on the History Channel and this Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program secretive group of the Pentagon to investigate UFOs. And so I brought these guys on a panel to kind of review my interview with Luis Elizondo and Martin's and some of what's going on. So some of these guys are Mike Damante of Punk Rock and UFOs. We've got Joe Murgia of UFOjoe.net. And then we've got Danny Silva of the Silva Record. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Wow. Great. I'm just so sorry I missed it.
I know. You were going to be there, but that didn't work out. That was too bad.
Had to go out on the boat.
Fun. But getting into the news, one of the things that both Martin and I have gotten to do, fortunately, recently is interview Luis Elizondo. He's done several interviews with Fox News, CNN, all these big news. They were on Good Morning America. But the UFO people, people who are kind of more into the topic and more educated on the details haven't been able to get to interview them in quite some time. And Martin and I did get to, so we got to ask some specific questions. We also coordinated a bit to make sure that our questions were not overlapping, which was a good thing, I think, because then we were able to get in more questions because we both had limited time. But Martin, I think that, I know there were some technical issues. I was teasing you about that. But, your interview was still great.
Well, thank you. Yes, I have no idea what happened. And it's just like, I wrote a blog about it on my website just because it was so unreal what happened. It was like a curse. I did indeed pull it off, but I had no idea while I was doing it if I was pulling it off or not. And the reason being is, anyone can go over to my website. Do you mind if I give it out?
Oh, of course. I always plug your website.
Yeah, podcastufo.com. You can see my blog, and I go into detail what happened.
But let's not.
I won't go into detail here.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. I mean, you got the interview out, and you've done something really cool, and I want to make sure people know this. You re-edit it where you fix the audio. You essentially spoke what your questions are. So if some people are too annoyed by the YouTube with, with your voice essentially being really low, you've edited it and fixed it where there's another version where it's all clean. And luckily, Luis Elizondo, because I tuned in, he came across great. I mean, you could hear his voice very clearly.
Yeah, and after the interview was over, I did go in and listen because I know this is hard to believe. I had no idea what he was saying. I could just barely hear him. Yeah, the audio was so hard coming in that I was guessing when he was done with a sentence before I'd ask my next question. So it was really quite a challenge, and it's just, I think my studio's haunted. I think I'm not in my studio now, and that's why you hear me.
Right. That's because why your stuff is working.
Yeah. But, it's funny. The whole thing almost fell apart on both of us, and, you pulled it together. We both got a notice that the interview was off, and you were able to reach out.
Let's get into the details of the interview, actually.
Yeah.
Sure. Because I think people find that more interesting than how we did it. But the details of your interview, how did you feel about the answers he gave you, and what was some of the information that you felt was most shocking or interesting?
Well, first of all, I asked him right off the bat about Keith Clore's article in the Inceptor. I think that's the name of it.
Interceptor.
And Intercept, yes, thank you. And so I think he answered the only way he could, because how can you defend, it's just one of those questions. How can you defend a question like when a spokesperson says...
This Keith Clore, getting into the details so people know what it is, he wrote an article, and essentially he heard from a spokesperson with the DoD who said, and I think the verbiage is important, that Luis Elizondo had no responsibilities to AATIP. That's essentially what he had said. And of course, detractors, people like Clore, took that as saying he didn't work for AATIP at all. In the meantime, we've had another DoD spokesperson already confirm months ago, back in December 2017, to Brian Bender of Politico, that he did work for AATIP. And let alone, we have all the people who work for AATIP saying, yes, Lou worked for AATIP. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, I think what you just said there is almost more important than a spokesperson, is other people that say they actually worked with him. Even David Fravor mentioned in 2014 that, he worked with him or talked to him as part of that program. And so I think that's just as important with all these people saying, yeah, I remember him there, as a spokesperson, because, we may not always get the straight scoop from any spokesperson, involved in the government. It's just the way it is.
Right.
So I thought that, he answered that as best he could, and basically ended it with saying, hopefully in the future everything will come out, and, people will see the other side of it. But, what is he going to do? Produce documents or, that are classified? He can't do that. Mm-hmm. So, and then, I just thought his questions, he answered all my questions, I thought, very well. Very thorough. And, again, the thing I really like about him, he's not, trying to force anyone to believe, what he's saying. He just puts it out there, and then, you can decide. But I totally, any little tiny bit of doubt I had about him, it has gone now. I totally believe he is who he says he is, and all that. So I was really thrilled that I did get that interview.
Why is that specifically? Do you feel that your doubts are gone because of the answers to your questions?
It's kind of, I think it's more the fact that I've looked at everything, that I can find and read, and different opinions on both sides. There's like two camps, like there is about everything today, and just kind of taking it all in, and then actually getting to meet him in person. I don't know. I just feel as though he's solid. I don't have any thoughts of negativity about him saying what he is. I mean, I don't understand what the motives would be if that's the case, or, some people are claiming he's a disinformation agent. And one of the questions I did ask him, because people were asking me to ask him, and that was, are you in any way or any capacity a government contractor currently? And he started laughing. He said, well, I sure wish if I was getting paid for it. So there's that's just one of the questions that were out there. I don't know. You probably got a flood of questions as well from people.
Oh, yeah, and then you started passing me questions. You're like, I have already too many questions. Maybe have Alejandro. Yeah. And I'm like, what? Don't send them to me. I already have a ton. So, I know. And actually, some of them you had forwarded me. I did want to ask, but I don't know that I don't think I got into those. But, why I asked you why you believe him, because there's twofold. I mean, when you meet someone and talk to someone, there's their character, and you're trying to make judgments off of character. Of course, that's more subjective, but I've always got the sense that, he's this genuine guy. And of course, I speak to him fairly regularly, and he's also, gets emotional about some things. He gets frustrated by some things. And they're very natural responses. And I think that when you meet him, or when you hear him answering these questions like he answered for us, there's no indication there where he's pausing to make something up or to lie or to fabricate. He tackles the question. Sometimes he feels a little exasperated, by the question, but he'll tackle it and try to answer it honestly. And they come across that way. So if he was some sort of still government, this was some part of some conspiracy, he'd have to be an incredible actor. But, let's put all that aside and just look at the straight data. Even if you look at the data itself, that's why I feel, unfortunately, and I'm, it's a lot of the people like Clore. Clore has gotten kind of in these online battles, well, with me, because he's attacked me on Twitter, but also with Brian Bender, who wrote that a political article, and Bender has been pretty plain that, hey, dude, you did not do your job. You were obviously spinning. And that is a fair assessment, especially from someone in journalism, because, sure, Sherwood did make that statement, but the statement is not clear. We know that there's only limited information a PAO officer has. We know this through our own history, but we also, Brian Bender, who's questioning that, also knows because he's worked in defense he was a war correspondent. He's worked writing about defense, just like Tyler Rogoway. But even more of a history, at least working with I can't say that for sure, but just to say he's very seasoned. He's an editor, for goodness sakes, for Politico on these topics. So he would understand that, you have to take some of that information. They out of everybody involved with this whole situation, the PAO of the DOD is going to be the least informed. It's just the way it is. I mean, this is someone who's not an officer, who's not been involved with all of these secret projects or these situations. We know from Reed that they tried to keep it as very hush-hush as possible. Then we have a host of other people, including another spokesperson who has all confirmed that Luis worked for AATIP. So, I mean, it's disingenuous to ignore all of that and not mention it. If you're writing a story, it's great to write a story about Sherwood. I don't even mind. I love that people are trying to look for the holes and try to find the information around it. We need the truth. But when you write a story, you've got to be honest, and you've got to say, Sherwood said this. However, we have a host of information that says otherwise. So why is there this discrepancy? That would be the question. And that is the way the question should be posed. It shouldn't be an accusation that, oh, look, this is evidence these people are lying. And that's the stance that was taken, unfortunately. And, some of these detractors who have been very vocal about all of this and are kind of saying, oh, we're just, innocently. No, I mean, the main person behind all of this got upset with me even in trying to say that I believe that one of these documents that turned out to be real, that the DOD said wasn't real and then had to change their story, Sherwood had to change his story and say, oh, I was wrong. You know, he got mad at me for even implying or suggesting that this document was real. And that's very frustrating. Also, Sherwood, out of everybody, has the worst track record. He's been wrong in the past. And I don't even mean to criticize him so much because he has limited information. But still, you've got to be honest about all of the data on the table. And all the data on the table thus far has shown that all these major players, you know, Knapp, some of the other people, the people involved with AATIP have been accurate. People like Mellon, Louise, I mean, their statements have all turned out to be accurate.
Let me ask you this, Alejandro. What could Lou Elizondo do to prove, or does he not even really care what people think? What could he do to prove that he did work for AATIP and he was heading AATIP, during that time?
It's very, very simple, and it's already done. So there is a document out there that already proves this. There's a document that was a memo from Harry Reid that was, actually it was a petition essentially for AATIP to get SAP status, which is Special Access Program status. These are the black projects. Black projects, the real term is SAP, Special Access Program. So these are the top secret projects. What that allows them is more secrecy for what they're doing, but it also allows them to be able to request to get information from other special access programs. That's what they were seeking. They didn't get approved for that. However, George Knapp leaked out this document that shows that, this was what they were looking for. And Harry Reid has confirmed that is a real document. That was a document I used to try to get SAP status. Now, the names were redacted in that document, but because of all of this to do with Sherwood's recent statement and Clore's article, George Knapp unredacted, and he got permission to do this from Luis Elizondo and from Hal Puthoff. And I've seen this document as well, unredacted. And so, those people are listed as people that are part of the program. So he re-released it, showing that Hal Puthoff and Luis Elizondo were part of AATIP. Boom! That shows they were part of AATIP. Not only that, the reason why he put Hal Puthoff is because Hal Puthoff has been telling people, and I've gotten this from Hal himself, saying that, yes, Elizondo was part of the program. When I went to the Pentagon, I reported to him, essentially. So what you need, it's not even necessary to have an official document, to be honest. I mean, that is something that we want to look for but to have confirm the people who were involved, to confirm that, credible people who we know were involved, that's just as good. So what would be helpful going forward is maybe a direct statement from Harry Reid, and I do not doubt that we're probably going to get that. What else would be helpful is then people sharing this information with Sherwood, because Sherwood's issue is he just doesn't have the information at hand. I've been saying he should have said, according to the information I have, Luis Elizondo did not have responsibilities to AATIP. Because he should have put that caveat in there, because he doesn't know for sure. If he would have said, I know definitely Lou did not work for AATIP, well, then he's claiming that all these people are lying. His predecessor, everybody with AATIP, he's claiming all these, but that's not what he's saying. He's essentially saying, I don't know any better. This is all I know. So he's being educated. I've sent him information. I know others have. And there is word that he is examining this information and will be coming out with a modified statement. So I think we're going to see him once again come out with a statement that, okay, I didn't have all the information. Now I have more, and here's what I found. That's what we should be looking for. And everybody keeps saying, oh, look, this is evidence that the FLIR videos were not from the DOD because this guy said that. This is evidence of this and that. And then later, when he's educated and documents come out to show otherwise, they make a statement, oh, okay, we admit that AATIP was part of UFOs. The DOD did release those FLIR videos. So, I mean, come on. Like I've said, there's a pattern here. The DoD says something counter to something we know, or at least indicating something that is counter to something we know. They're educated. Then they come out and say, okay, they don't say we were wrong specifically, but they were, because they come out and say, oh, we got new information, and indeed this was the truth. What Lou and the AATIP guys have been saying was the truth. And we've seen this pattern over and over and over again. So, like I put in one tweet, what's the definition of insanity? At this point, you might even be able to say it's insane to just take Sherwood's word for it without more information, because every single time they've had to change their statement. So I think we have an abundance of information. We may get more. At this point, we need to move on, because this is a waste of time to rehash this one question where we already know the answer. Whereas, and we should get into some of the news, there's a lot of great information still coming forward.
Yeah, just one last thing on the redacted letter from George Knapp. Someone had written me a note that predated Lou Elizondo's claim. Is that so? I mean, that...
Well, no, that's not true at all. In fact, the document does say Lou was involved with AATIP, and Lou has said he was involved with AATIP. You've got to read, and it is confusing, and I don't blame people. I've got an article that's called From OSAP to AATIP. OSAP was the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. AATIP was the second program, which was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And it was very confusing, and that's why I've written this article, and I don't think anybody's broken it down to this level. And I interviewed the people to find out what happened. Essentially, there was OSAP, which was covering all the paranormal, researching Skinwalker. That right when it started, people didn't like it. There were especially religious factions saying, hey, this is demonic stuff, we can't do this. So they started a subgroup called AATIP that focused just on military UFO cases that they hoped would survive. That's what Lou came to be involved with at first, not run. And then so they were right. OSAP was just not palatable to those inside, so it went away. And then AATIP luckily survived, and they were able to continue to investigate UFOs. And then in 2010, Luis took it over. So does it predate when Luis ran AATIP? Yes, but it doesn't predate his involvement with AATIP, obviously, because he's listed there.
I got it. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah. It is confusing, so I'd recommend people read that article. And that's why my first question to Lou when I interviewed him was, as far as you know, because he's looked at that story, that is accurate, right? And he said, yeah, it is. And the way he wrote, when he first read that story, he said, oh my gosh, that's crazy accurate. He's like, I don't even know where you got all that information, because I don't feel like I gave you all that information. He's like, that's the most accurate telling of the story I've seen. Those were his remarks to me, which of course I felt very proud of that, because I just want to help clarify all this situation for people.
One other thing I want to say, and I know we don't have much time here to talk about anything else, but one thing I have to say is the New York Times, there's hardly any journalistic media out there that does as much research and vetting as the New York Times before they publish a story.
That's a great point.
They're extremely careful.
Exactly. So if you're questioning their facts, you better have your stuff together. And so far, people who have questioned them have been wrong. And even I thought, well, what they wrote in there doesn't necessarily fit the timeline. But if you read my story I just mentioned, yes, what they wrote does even fit the timeline. I even answer why they excluded the OSAP part, and that's in my story. But another person who did the research was Politico, and Brian Bender. I've had some discussions with him, and he's tweeted this recently. He talked with generals. He talked with a bunch of high-level officials inside the government when he caught wind of AATIP's existence, and he verified through these people before 2017 that AATIP existed. He said the sentiment was AATIP exists, they wanted to start this program. I said, okay, do what you want, but I don't want anything to do with it because it's too crazy. So Bender talked to, and he tweeted this, he talked to very many officials. So, I mean, it's well established at this point AATIP exists. What we need to do, and you wouldn't have the Navy talking to these guys, which we're going to see in Unidentified. We wouldn't have a television program based on these guys where the Navy is working on it. I mean, essentially it's so well established at this point. I think it's kind of silly to be wasting our time with it, to be honest. I mean, we got to move on.
Right. And speaking of moving on, I think we're almost out of time, aren't we?
Yep. Gotta move on. You know that 80s song. But one of the articles I want to mention too in the news, because I did post news at the front page of openminds.tv, is one by Task and Purpose, which is a great journalist who actually talked to the Navy and the Air Force about their thoughts. And the Navy said, well, there's a proliferation of drones out there, so we don't know what some of these UAVs may be, or UAPs, UFOs. And then an Air Force guy said, but you know what? Drones probably don't have that sort of long-range capability. So it's kind of interesting. We've got this conversation going on about this stuff. So that's a great article. Yeah. A number of other great articles. But thank you, Martin, so much.
You bet. I can't wait to listen to the roundtable. I'm sorry I missed it.
Yeah, that's too bad.
To be there, that is.
Yep, we were hoping Martin could join us, but it didn't work out. But thank you so much. Let's go ahead and listen to that roundtable after this break. I am super happy to welcome back on the show, but this time all at once, our expert panel on AATIP and To the Stars. We've got Joe Murgia, also known as UFO Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Alejandro. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So happy you guys could all make it. But we've also got Mike Damante of Punk Rock and UFOs.
Thanks for having me again. It's good to finally talk to some of you guys, quote unquote, in person.
Yeah, how cool is that? And then finally, Danny Silva, who runs the Silva Record.
What's good, Alejandro? Thank you for having me. I'm ready to do this.
All right. We're ready to rock. So this is going to be fun. I guess the first thing I want to mention, now, I think, did all of you get to hear my interview with Lou? I think, Mike, you said you didn't yet.
No, not yet.
Cool. So we'll be able to give you some information from it that you are not aware of. But of all the things in the interview, and the first thing I'd like to talk to you guys about that shocked me the most, and, some of us have even talked about this on Twitter publicly, but when I asked him about the crash retrieval stuff, mainly because I'm really skeptical about crash retrievals in the first place, and of course I've put a lot of effort into investigating Roswell and the others, and it's mostly anecdotal information. We don't have a whole lot there. But then, as you all know, Eric Davis is a proponent that there are crash retrieval programs out there. And I asked him about that a few weeks ago. I think you all have talked to him about that too, some of you. But with Davis, it doesn't surprise me. I've heard him go there. He goes into lots of really wild areas. But I was shocked when with Lou, I wanted some clarification around his statements on Fox News and other places. And I kind of had this idea that it was just his personal opinion that there might be programs out there. But then I said, but this is something you can't prove, right? And he said, no, I wouldn't say that. So to me means if he was hard pressed, if for some reason somebody put the screws on him and he had to out, that there is a crash project, that he would be able to provide evidence to prove that there is indeed a UFO crash program. That to me was probably the most shocking thing. Let's open it up to the group. Go ahead.
I don't think there's any way that the government isn't holding some of these pieces, especially with To the Stars openly talking about the Atom Project. The government definitely has stuff, and the question is, do they have a whole craft or large pieces, or do they have small pieces? But Hal Puthoff kind of let the cat out of the bag when he said to George Knapp on Coast to Coast, he said, the whole craft would be highly classified. So I felt like that was a big hint.
Mm-hmm. What about you others? What do you guys think?
I'm amazed that he didn't just say no comment. I'm not prepared to talk about that on Tucker Carlson, because he's done that in the past plenty of times. When there's a question he doesn't like or he can't answer, he'll say I'm going to defer and just leave that one alone. But on a national news broadcast, cablecast, he's basically telling everybody in the world that the government has pieces of a craft. And then Eric Davis, Alejandro, what were Eric Davis's exact words? Because it seemed like he even expanded on materials. He said, what was the word he used, Davis?
Well, I can't remember in particular, but the gist of what he told me when I kind of was plugging him on this, and he went into this really long tangent about how he knows this, is that it is secondhand information. He essentially said, when you work on so many top secret projects, you run across a lot of people, and in the back rooms, when you're talking, when people begin to trust you, they start to share information. So, and why I bring that up is, so the details are murky and still a bit, about what he knows or exactly what he's been told. But yeah, it sounded like craft and pieces type of stuff, actual crashes.
It definitely sounded that way to me.
Mm-hmm. And
I would
I
have
think
never
one of the
believed
reasons why, for us, or people who are into this stuff, it kind of fell under the radar, because this is stuff we've been hearing for years. But it's still interesting to see him just kind of drop that comment,
Yeah, we've been hearing it for years. I think it's just hearing it from Elizondo is a little different, for me at least, because he was actually in the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And I'm used to, over the years, hearing, because I've known, since Skinwalker. Davis is a guy who had the weird experiences at Skinwalker. You're used to hearing some weird stuff from Davis over the years, I guess is how I'll put it. Even Hal Puthoff. He started doing remote viewing and everything. So he's been into some odd topics. But then to hear that backed up, it's pretty shocking. To be honest, I'm still a bit skeptical. What do they... a crash to me means an aircraft of some sort, or some sort of craft actually crashing and retrieving. That would be a lot of material that would be retrieved.
What's crazy about this is that everyone is saying this across the board. Diana Pasulka, Jacques Vallée, To the Stars, Eric Davis, Luis Elizondo, even people that don't agree, like Stephen Greer, I think, would probably say that. So it's not just coming from one source, it's coming from everyone. And it is hard to believe, but once you start hearing it from everywhere, I'm pretty certain of that fact now.
And it's
go ahead.
It's just, it seems like it's a coordinated effort, and that's conspiratorial. They all got together, but it's like all of a sudden within a month or so, it's like every one of them are saying, they're talking about us having craft, and they didn't talk about bodies yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's somewhere down the line. And then, it's like, what do you think? You think it's just random? that Elizondo is bringing this up on Tucker Carlson?
I think so. Tucker asked him, and I don't think that was, and pressed him on it. And I don't think that they coordinated questions. Okay. I would doubt that. And that part definitely didn't sound like it. Typically those appearances are really hectic, where, they're like, we got to get you on. It's enough just trying to get the person in the right seat with the camera in front of them, let alone coordinating other things. And I think we can tell that by some of the clothes that Lou is wearing when he does some of these interviews, that he's just kind of rushing over and getting in front of the camera. But some of his outfits, you guys got to admit, some people have teased him about it, but they're pretty interesting.
I'll wear a backwards hat every once in a while. No, actually, I probably won't. But I'm not gonna fault him for it.
No, I'm not gonna fault him. It's just funny.
I wouldn't wear it with a suit.
Yeah, right. Not with a suit. It's kind of endearing. And while we're on this topic, just to tease the show a little bit, there was a scene that we thought was really funny with the beginning where he goes to talk to Kevin Day, and he's got that giant backpack for no apparent reason.
I think he planned on maybe possibly sleeping out in the backyard and he had his tent in there? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is he going to camp out in the yard? I don't know what's going on here. But that was pretty funny. But sorry, to get back to the more serious point, crash retrievals. Yes, I think that what I personally feel that we've heard this all over the years. What's new and why we're hearing a lot of things brought up again is that now we have this guy who worked in the Pentagon working on this stuff. And so now all of these topics get brought up because we're kind of throwing the stuff against the wall. What about this? What about that? What about this? And to find out what he knows about some of these things that other people have shared. It's not too surprising that he would, to me, feel that there's enough evidence that there is a crash project. Now, he may be getting all of his info from Davis because we have to remember, Lou was not a UFO guy till 2009 or 10. And when he got into OSAP/AATIP, and Bigelow was essentially the main contractor, mostly running stuff by then. So Lou would have them began working very closely with the Bigelow group, essentially, you know, Davis and Putoff. So they would be very influential on, you know, what his views would be on this field, I think. You guys agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, Bigelow has the pieces, according to the New York Times, and they may not be in Vegas, but they're. It sounds like they got them somewhere, and it's just, you know, like I said earlier, if all these private people have them, the government definitely does. Mm-hmm. And
so I found. Sorry, go ahead, Danny.
Oh, that's okay.
I found the quote where Davis gave to James Iandoli. It said, Luis Elizondo's brief answer to Tucker Carlson's question about whether the U.S. government is in possession of recovered crash and landed UFO technology hardware is 1,000% accurate. See, those are the words Davis used. Elizondo didn't use those words, so it's going just a little further. UFO technology hardware. So, like, to me, I'm thinking maybe it's just a piece, but that sounds like a little more than that. And it's funny what Danny just said about, you know, we talked about the alloys in the New York Times article, and I think Lou said, well, the reporter got that wrong. It wasn't alloys, it was metamaterials. But Leslie Keene was on an NPR show the other day, and that was brought up. The person read the metal alloys part, and Leslie didn't say, well, we got it wrong, it's not metal alloys. She stuck with that story, and she was kind of implying that that's what it was. And she didn't back down and say, well, yeah, it's metamaterials. She didn't say anything about that. So I'm kind of curious.
Was she pressed on that point?
She wasn't pressed. He just read the article and mentioned metal alloys, and she said, we stand by our reporting.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be tough. Science reporting is really difficult because you've got to take these complex scientific concepts and boil them down for the public to understand. And sometimes, you know, and the scientists want accuracy more than anything. They don't want it to seem like they don't even understand their own programs when other scientists look at it. And it's hard, and this is why scientists don't like to talk to the media, and it sucks because I think that's why they've got such a bad name right now. But so I could see how they were trying to, but the difference is alloys, that's a very important scientific difference. An alloy, is going to, and other people have made this argument, you know, not reflect something unusual, whereas a metamaterial or something like that would, possibly.
I think it's all the same terms. Dr. Gary Nolan has been at the forefront of this, and they called it alloys, and then I think Dr. Nolan, you know, was saying he coined the term to start calling it metamaterials, and now that started to confuse people, and now Dr. Nolan has said, well, let's stop calling them metamaterials. Let's call them ultramaterials. But it's all just terms, I think, at the end of the day. And I think the New York Times was probably describing the same thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, when we're on the topic of Davis and Putoff, you know, obviously, and we'll talk about this a little. I don't want to really disparage characters, you know, people too much personally. But there's, of course, this group of people who seem hell-bent on taking To the Stars down. What's interesting about this is that these people are people who have been in this field for so long. They've been wanting to get information out. Now when people get information out, they bash those people. It's just weird. It seems like this is what they wanted, but instead of... And it would be different if they were being fair, because I think that's great if you're being fair, but this isn't fair. And one of the things that they've hinted at is going at the credibility of Davis and Puthoff. And like I've said, even I sometimes can kind of take some of the things with a grain of salt, just because, you know, I'm used to them talking about these really weird things. But these guys are very well established. Like Davis has said, he's worked on very many projects with very many different companies that are secret, and continues to do that. He's definitely a respected engineer who's implanted into that community. He's established himself. Same with Puthoff. Puthoff, all the way back in the 70s, started working on government projects. Sure, they were weird, including psychic phenomena, but that psychic program that he worked with the CIA and the Stanford Research Institute on existed for years and was recreated in different military branches, and you know, law enforcement was relying on this remote viewing project that they did. So he obviously is very established as well inside of, you know, working even on fringe topics with government agencies. So these guys are very well established. I think it's going to be, you might be able to call some of the things they say into doubt, but you're not, I think, going to be able to completely destroy their connections and their you know, relationships inside.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna add something to that. Kind of what you're saying earlier about, we're talking about the disparity between like metamaterials and other things that are called. So this is what's happening right now, is the detractors are basically nitpicking on little words and they're just blowing it up. And I've never seen anything like this in any other form of study. Especially, you know, my experience in journalism. Even like, you know, you see Brian Benner going after these people on Twitter because he's an actual journalist who covers national security and politics. And I'm pretty sure, you know, some of those topics have even more avenues to go down, but yet he's having to defend these things that he probably shouldn't even have to be defending. And a lot of times, you know, in journalism, which is kind of a, some people may not agree with this, but we rely a lot on official titles, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But these official titles, if they're saying something that's not credible, then they're the ones who have to pay for it later. But nothing these people have said so far is not credible. So their titles alone lend them to be trustworthy, and the stuff they've been saying, it's been backed up. So they're going to find every little thing to nitpick and twist to try to fit this narrative that somehow Luis Elizondo isn't who he claims to be, or whatever other, you know, theories that they're pushing out, or this is all to push a TV show, which is the dumbest thing I ever heard. So it's just interesting how they're latching on to these little words here and there, and they're just blowing them up.
Yeah, to that point, I think that's why they really focus in on and pick on me the most, because I am a bit of the runt of the litter. I mean, I have the least credentials. You guys like go at them face forward more, but you know, head on. But I mean, I don't have the credentials of a Brian Bender, of a Leslie Kean, of a George Knapp. But it's bled over, because I was accusing them of, well, what you're saying is that Leslie's got it wrong, George has got it wrong. When you're calling into question the quotes that I'm getting from George and Leslie, then you're calling them into question. And now it's kind of become more of a full frontal attack on George and Leslie Kean as well. Yeah. But yeah, I wanted to hear Joe, because you've been, you know, deep and heavy in all of this too.
I mean, the fact that we have Brian Bender going at these people is amazing. I mean, the guy's, the credibility of a political defense writer is just, I couldn't ask for more to have him involved, and he gets down in the weeds and goes at these people. But it's like, yeah, if you believe, you have to discount George Knapp, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, Helene Cooper, Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, all people, Harry Reid, who have talked about working with Elizondo. And it's like, so all those people are lying and we're supposed to believe you? And you said it's weird. Yeah, I don't get it either. I've seen debunkers, so that's par for the course. But when people have spent decades researching UFOs, those are the people who are going after Elizondo and TTSA and AATIP. I don't get it. I don't know if it's ego or it's jealousy. I know Lou touched upon the jealousy and said there's no reason to have jealousy. We're all striving for the same thing. We just want to get the truth. We want to get this information out, and it's a drain having to deal with people within the community. It's just a waste of time, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm. And here's another thing people don't realize, that these aren't rogue journalists. They work for organizations that have to vet and approve of every source and everyone they talk to first. So the editors have to trust their sources too. So it's not just Knapp and Keene saying, hey, I'm going to do this story. It has to be approved. The sources have to be approved. That's every large publication operates that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what, I think a lot of people don't realize, that, these aren't some, journalists coming out of the woodworks and they're doing this on their own. No, they're getting approval by their company. And a lot of times, they're working for a news organization is also a corporation. There's corporate interest as well. So I don't think they would be risking potential advertising revenue or readership if they didn't think that the story was credible or that the sources are credible.
Right.
Even for a topic like this, which, to the mainstream may be, kind of out there, but still.
We've got, Kevin Clore is one of the journalists writing. Of course, he's kind of been very anti to the stars, and I think that Brian Bender has called him out, and I agree. And I think that the problems with his story are more stark for those of us who are in journalism, because there were some rules that were broken. I mean, sure, he did get information from the DOD, from the spokesperson, that Sherwood said that, Lou didn't have any responsibilities towards AATIP. That is something to write about. That's a piece of news. He should be writing an article about that. But the problem with that article, if you look at it in an unbiased way, is to say, well, the spokesperson's saying that. However, we have a lot of credible information that says the opposite. So what's the problem here? And writing an article about that is fine, but he totally did not include any of all of this credible information. So he didn't do his due diligence in that article, which is why to a journalist, it obviously has a bias. All of this is what Brian Bender has been calling him out. So let's look at Brian Bender. Brian Bender has no loyalty to any of these people. He's talked about some of his skepticisms and problems with things. But you're right. He's working for Politico as a defense editor. He has a lot on the line. If he says something that is not that, or even if he's perceived as being biased, he could get in a lot of trouble and it would hurt his credibility. So not only that, when Bender is talking, at least for me, and you probably feel the same way, Mike, maybe you guys, others, you sit and you listen because you're learning. You're learning how it's done. And he made some great points. You don't go to FOIA. If you're with Politico, for instance, I contacted Sherwood. I've gone to the media inquiry lines to get a hold of these people. That's where you go. You go straight, and that's where they want you to go, to talk to these POA or PAO people. You don't put in a FOIA. You put a FOIA in when all else fails, and you're not going to get anything from it for maybe months or years. So you go direct. That's why you don't see the FOIAs. So Brian Bender, you're learning this is how journalism is done. Leslie Kean, maybe you can be a little critical of her because she's written a UFO book and she's written about UFOs, but the article was in the New York Times. Like she said, it was well vetted, and New York Times is known for vetting their articles. I mean, even Tyler Rogaway said New York Times just got this stuff handed to him. I don't agree with that. They did some work. I've interviewed Leslie several times. I know her. I know the work that they did. Who's another journalist that's being called out? Oh, George Knapp. George Knapp, you can cast some doubt on him because he's been writing about paranormal stuff for a long time. But at the same time, I think that shows that he has even more skills at being credible because he's written about all of this stuff for a long time. He's walked that gray line, putting his credibility at risk. But to this day, he has not been called out or has not displayed any overt biasness. Instead, he's written great stories that win awards. He's won so many damn awards, it's crazy. So this is obviously someone who's skilled enough to look at these situations and be credible, report in a credible way. So none of these people, they're all pretty bulletproof, especially when it comes to the goofy people who are the detractors. So, I mean, like you say, the credibility weighs heavily on the side of these credible journalists.
And let me jump in real quick. And here's the thing another people don't realize too, is that just because you have expertise does not mean it lends to a bias. Just because Leslie Kean's written books on UFOs doesn't mean there's a perceived bias in her writing the story. If you look at the New York Times story, I interviewed Rob Blumenthal. I was going to ask about that quote they have to show balance from the Harvard physicist, which is an awful quote. But they threw that in there to show balance in the story. It wasn't just, here's what these pilots saw. They threw in a counter quote to kind of maintain that balance. And the story that story came about because they saw a screener of Unidentified. Unidentified to the stars and say, hey, here's an advanced screener. Go do your own work. They decided to do that on their own. And what Ralph said to me would make sense. There's plenty of room in the paper to do a review or an entertainment story on it. Those are two totally different things. So, the show and that article was separate. I think a lot of people fail to realize, they want to make these connections where it's just some huge corporate conspiracy. And, Brian Bender's appearing on television because Politico allows him to. Do you think how much money, if any, do you think he's seeing from being on that show?
Not a lot.
Yeah, not a lot. We got to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk more about these topics. So I'm with Mike Damante of Punk Rock and UFOs, Joe Murgia of UFO Joe, and Danny Silva of the Silver Record, and we'll be right back here listening to Open Mind UFO Radio. Welcome back to Open Minds UFO Radio. I am your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I have a superstar, and at least for me, dream team panel here talking about the Unidentified television show and, of course, the organizations affiliated with it, including AATIP and To the Stars, AATIP being the secretive Pentagon program. I like to use the term secretive because it wasn't necessarily classified as secret, or all of it. So it was. I like the term that the media seems to have picked up also as secretive. But we've got Joe Damante here of Punk Rock and UFOs. We've got Joe Murgia, who runs the website UFO Joe, and we've got Danny Silva of the Silver Record. So Danny, we were just talking about kind of the detractors and some of the heavy hitters that they're going against, and quite frankly, looking kind of shabby against. What is your take? Because you've been in there as well.
First off, I think we just need to keep in mind that there's so many crazy details, and with all of this stuff with AATIP and OSAP, and all of us that have been following it this whole time, at least since 2017, we're still fuzzy on certain details, and so no one's going to be right 100% of the time. The only person that's been there from the beginning, really, that's a reporter, is George Knapp. So he's the most credible person. So you can pick apart anything that the New York Times or even Politico says if it's a tiny little detail, but they get the general story right. But then they probably did also make some errors. But then you look over at the other side of it, and these guys are making massive, huge errors. They're saying it's aviation for a year and a half and doing all these other things. So there's errors going around for everyone. So I just think that we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a great point is, I think along those lines, George Knapp has been here the longest. I mean, he has sat on a lot of this information and finally able to release a lot of information, which I know he's ecstatic about. As journalists, that's what we love to do, is share the information with the public. He has been proven accurate time and time again. And so has Lou. And really, from the beginning, even with Luis Elizondo, he made claims that the DOD countered. And, there's always nuances. And so I think we kind of all waited to hear what the DOD would say or what would come to light. George has been there to verify lots of Lou's claims, which over time have also been verified by the DOD, and they've had to change their story. Which, to those of us who have followed UFO stories, it's not surprising because we've seen this over the years. They had to do this with Stephenville, a very famous sighting. They had to do this with the incredible sighting in 2008 at Chicago O'Hare. So we've seen this over and over again before. So it's not too surprising. And who has taught me? The best teacher to show me that these public affairs offices typically get it wrong and has demonstrated it and just slam dunked and in the face of the PAO offices has showed they've been wrong over and over again. John Greenwald of the Black Vault. But for some reason, when it comes to this story, after years, I've interviewed him. You can go back and listen to my podcast with him. We've had so many over this very topic, and he's like, I don't know why they're lying to me. I don't know why they're giving me wrong information. But in this case, he's the guy not only that is backing the DOD. Every time they say something, he's like, oh, they've got it right and Lou's got it wrong, and he's been wrong every time. But he also is the guy that the DOD's been going to first. Why are they giving John information? They're not giving it to me. They're not even giving it to George or others a lot of the time. Instead, they're going to John first. In fact, I knew this. I even said this, I think, on the show. When the DOD has to change their story about the FLIR videos, that they did release them, I'll bet they'll release them to John first, and there'll be a spin already pre-prepared. And, of course, they did, and they had this ridiculous spin that was just, I feel that we blew out of the water in seconds.
Yeah, and I think when they get things wrong, and I hear Lou talk about it, they talk about it being a giant bureaucracy, and it's just one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. And I've had Eric Davis tell me that too. But then, so it's like, nothing nefarious going on there. But then you hear what you just said, and they're purposely going to somebody who's negative against all this, and they're going to Greenwald first. It makes you think that there's more to it than just bureaucracy.
Right.
Yeah, this kind of goes to I think Tom said this months ago. I think before this even all started, that how there is this kind of infighting, this war, kind of within the Pentagon about this. And this could obviously be, a concerted effort to try to muddy the waters. Is having somebody say, you know what, this side's trying to get this out, and it's going to get out, but let's throw a wrench in it. Mm-hmm.
Well, Bender even tweeted, I think yesterday, that Lou has more enemies on the inside than he has allies. And we know, and Lou even admitted this because he doesn't like to talk bad about anybody on the inside, but that there were people who did not like him coming forward with all of this information. He says that a lot of them have changed their tune now that they've seen it's been positively received by the public, but that there were a lot that were upset. And I can see this from the Public Affairs Department. I can see how they would be like, hey, man, you're on our team, and here you are outing all of this stuff. We're being totally caught off guard. Now we've got to answer questions about UFOs, and we're not ready for this. You could have given us a heads up. But I think if you see it from Lou's perspective, if he would have given them a heads up, they might have ran to their bosses to try to shut up Lou, and that would have created more problems. So, in order to get this information out, which is what we've all been striving for years, it had to go down this way. The DOD's not happy about it, but they've really got to dummy up. They've just got to, deal and quit undermining their own credibility by countering it and then having to correct their statements later on. That's how I feel.
And remember early on, Lou said he got death threats from people inside the Pentagon. So, I mean, yeah. Some people are obviously even more than just upset if you're making death threats against them.
Right. So let's get into the show. Last night's show, which episode 2 of Unidentified. I've read, at least, Joe, some of what you've written about the episode. I want to start off with Danny, if that's all right. What did you think of the show last night? Maybe you feel free to get into details. Spoiler alert, by the way.
I liked it. The first 2 episodes, they've seemed to be more for people that aren't up on the details of the story like we are. So the general public and even just people in the UFO community that aren't up on the TTSA stuff. My favorite thing, and I wrote a blog about it, was that the AATIP hotspot map. I thought that was really interesting, and it was had a lot of Easter eggs for us to kind of go back and look at. But other than that, they're digging into this Catalina hotspot thing. I also thought it was interesting that they put out there, that maybe it could be our tech, or at least they didn't deny it.
Right.
They showed both sides of the story, so I thought that was pretty fair of them.
They made a strong argument, I think, by the end, especially that it could be our tech, which was interesting and fair. Joe, what did you think?
I agree, and it's funny with the timing because we know Tyler Rogaway of The Drive has written a couple of articles that highly suggests that it may be our tech in 2004 and the 2014-2015 incidents. So I took some notes. Bender called the secret test of our tech a reasonable hypothesis, possible that Elizondo didn't know about it. The female wingman said maybe they were vectored into a live range and the object under the water was maybe a sub. Elizondo said that there were antenna arrays connected to government activity that maybe played a role in the 2004 events. And then he said, we can't rule out that we have tech to achieve those hypersonic speeds. And then Justice said, hypersonic craft want to travel above 5,000 feet. The Tic Tac went down to sea level, so that was kind of against the our tech argument. But then Justice at the end, he said that it's possible it's black budget tech, but if so, somebody would know that you're operating near that area where they were doing the exercise. But if an admiral was in charge and didn't make a report, it could be because it was an operational test. Not everybody gets to know everything. So I was surprised they went there. I mean, I didn't expect that.
Mm-hmm. I still think that probably they don't believe that, and they're just saying those things to be fair. You hear some of the interviews and with Chris Mellon and Lou, and they really don't seem to believe that angle, but they did play it up in the show.
And then when Alejandro interviewed LePay, what's his first name, the showrunner? Anthony LePay, he said that he spoke to Justice on and off the record, which I thought was interesting, and he said basically, yeah, the technology that they saw is so much far, it's beyond anything that he worked on as far as propulsion systems, so that's the other argument that it's not ours.
Mm-hmm. And Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say, whether they believe that or not, it's still pretty, I think it's good that they include those other perspectives in the show, because the show does come across as a very credible argument to make, regarding the subject. Like, I talk about this stuff with my friends and my fiance all the time, but like last night she watched the episode with me and she was glued to the TV just because like the way it's presented. They do a really good job of presenting this very down the middle. Obviously their opinions may be different, but they do try to at least present an alternative argument that I think will keep mainstream viewers interested. It's not like it's Ancient Aliens where it's mostly one side of the argument. They are providing these alternative solutions, whether they believe them or not. And I think that's a good thing.
You know what I was really impressed with that side of their investigation is that they covered, like, there have obviously been people out there doing the same thing. Tyler Rogaway, I think, is probably one of the most skilled because he just writes about Defense for the Drive war zone. And he, like you said, wrote up that whole thing. He's written a couple things. First, about how these radars came online in 2004 and 2015. I would argue the technology, of course, that we would have would be vastly different between 2004 and 2015. That's kind of one issue with that idea, I think. But he also brought up how this is a testing zone, the Catalina Island area. It's a huge oceanic kind of area where there's aerospace and underwater military testing that goes on, which is a really great point. Also, which is why you see those radars and antenna arrays on Catalina. But also that the... just about all this testing and everything. But I thought it was great. Oh, the missile test that they covered as well. But what's cool is that they, on their own, doing their own research, had made the same discoveries that Tyler Rogaway, the seasoned defense writer had discovered as well. So I think it just showed that they did some really good work, which they should. I mean, with the crew that they have, researching what the potential, more mundane answers could be. I think that it showed that they did a really good job. They answered Rogaway's questions and others, which I doubt Rogaway was expecting, and some of these others who thought, man, I really got a scoop here. I really picked up on something that I'm sure they didn't. Well, they did pick up on that, and we saw that.
Not to mention the TV show was probably recorded last year before a lot of these articles came out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It reminds me, you guys probably remember this because we probably all retweeted it when Lou retweeted, a few images. I think maybe To the Stars did. I don't remember. Lou doesn't have a Twitter. What am I talking about? But it was probably To the Stars where it showed Tom and him off doing adventures and stuff. This was probably like a year ago. And now we know this was part of the show. So you're right. They shot this stuff a long time ago.
And a lot of stuff that they've been shooting was before the show even exists. Some of the footage in the first episode was from when Tom took a camera with him to one of the very first times he went to the White House, which was initially supposed to be the Secret Machines documentary film.
That's a really good point. So Tyler Rogaway's article, and this is a tough one. I think that there's the whole Bigelow side. He really needs to look into the history of Bigelow and how his investigations, and how To the Stars is very much a continuation of like Bigelow's National Institute of Discovery Sciences and BASS, which was a partner with AATIP. We can even see that in the name. BASS is the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Systems
Space
Studies.
Yeah.
But it's still got that terminology in there that's similar to AATIP and these other organizations. But, it's a lot of the same players. Hal and Davis, for example. Colm Kelleher was one of the scientists who still works for Bigelow Aerospace, was with To the Stars. And then you have some new people that are in there. But Tyler Rogaway kind of was taking this angle. And I did address this with Lou, that, Tom got a lot of cooperation with the military, and that, this all could be like a big propaganda thing for the military to make them look good, which is kind of the angle Tom took to them, that in all this UFO stuff, you guys are looking like the villain. That shouldn't be the case. I want to help change that. However, what Lou said is, it's ridiculous to say that we're kind of being pulled by the nose, but that we are cooperating, because it would be silly of us not to cooperate to work with them. And obviously the Navy has been very cooperative with coming up with UFO protocols, and then also allowing these pilots to be on the show. What do you guys think of that?
I'm kind of still digesting it. I think it's funny that a lot of fans of To the Stars want to believe that To the Stars is basically another arm of the government. They want that, and then the detractors look at that and they say that's a huge, horrible, bad thing. So it's kind of funny that how everyone looks at that particular theory differently.
Yeah, and I'm not Mr. UFO history, but I was reading up on, found an article in the New York Times. It was I think it was in the 80s, but they were talking about NICAP, and NICAP had a ton of former government people working with them. And I don't know, Alejandro, if you know history, but were they facing the same criticism as far as people who used to work for the government working for them? Because to me, it's like, yeah, there are people in our government and intelligence agencies that are interested in this subject. So it's like, that's I would expect that. So now that they're interested and they're actually helping push this topic along, and actually we're open to DeLonge helping them get this information out, my first response is not that it's some nefarious behind the scenes program where they're trying to push disinformation on us. I'm happy they're involved. Like Danny said, yeah, TTS people who support TTSA are happy that they're helping push this story out. Whether or not there's disinfo, I have not seen anything that set my alarm bells off that said, that's really pushing it. I don't believe that. It's been so basic so far. It's been basically unidentified objects in our airspace. We don't know what they are.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right in that NICAP. There's a total difference between then and now. Back then, everybody was patriotic, and it was good to see the government and military as being good and helpful and doing positive things. Not like it is now, where it's kind of the trend to see the government as evil and bad, and anything that they're touching has got to be some sort of nefarious type of thing. So that's the difference. Now, NICAP, even in that environment, was criticized for that. But even, one of their consultants, who was an admiral, Hillenkotter, he even, kind of got conspiratorial with the Air Force and was saying, which was accurate, that the Air Force was spinning this when they actually take it more seriously. But then as time went on, Hillenkotter left the group, and then people started saying he was part of the conspiracy and he's part of MJ-12. So they dealt with that. They did have that, but not to the degree that you would now. So it's really interesting and strange, to see how people are handling this. I think Bender has talked along these lines, at least to me, what Lou expressed seems accurate. And you can see this through the history of Bigelow Aerospace and the different groups. They have been pushing to research this topic and to make it more credible throughout the years, trying to work with inside organizations, and that now they've just got more of that going on than ever before, mostly because of connections that Mellon and Justice and Lou have, that they definitely want to work with their partners on the inside. That doesn't mean that I think they're driving the narrative. I think To the Stars is driving the narrative because you guys follow this very closely, and that's what it appears to be. That's what we see, is To the Stars looking at something, not being told to look somewhere, but they're the ones prodding. I don't think the government wants us to look at crash retrieval projects or any of this sort of thing. And the DOD Public Affairs Office is obviously not happy about all of this. What do you think, Joe? All right, yeah.
I don't know if they're thrilled about. I would think they're not thrilled about crash retrieval programs, assuming they even know about that stuff. It's not so black budget, they don't even know. But as far as, I said, I don't think there's anything as far as conspiratorial or something related to disinformation. But when DeLonge talks about some of the stuff he was told, it's so fear-based, some of it early on when he would talk about that stuff. Maybe they're putting out that story because Kit Green has spoken about how the way they get information out is they tell this really outlandish, scary story, and it gets people all frightened. But then when the truth comes out, it's something a lot less prosaic. It's not prosaic, but it's a lot less scarier, and it's people like, oh, that's the truth? Okay, the other story was really scary. I can handle this. So it's kind of like the technique they use. And I don't know if that's what went on with DeLonge, but I don't know what you guys think, but some of the stuff he talked about was almost all fear-based.
Yeah, and I wasn't a fan of that, the whole threat narrative, but I could see why they'd use that threat narrative to get other people in the government to get their attention, because then it goes beyond just UFOs. Then it becomes that there's something, like they've said before, there's something in our sky, we don't know what it is, and we can't control it. So I guess by that definition, yes, it is a threat. But as long as you're not pushing the whole evil alien agenda, I'm fine with it.
No, I agree. I have no problem with the threat because I know they have to use that to get funding and get the interest of certain people in Congress. But as long as some of that scary stuff isn't brought up again, because DeLonge doesn't talk about it anymore, and it hasn't been brought up by anybody else in To the Stars, so I'm good as long as they don't bring that up again. Of course, maybe that's the truth. I don't know. I don't know really we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going on behind with the phenomena. I mean, who knows? Maybe there is a really negative aspect to this. We've all talked about it. We've all considered it.
I kind of, I just sit here and I listen to those guys. I feel like they really know what they're talking about. Eric Davis also, mentioned that, I think, recently to you, Alejandro, that, nothing good has came out of this. Then there is, a whole series of people that say it's totally positive. But I just kind of sit out on that one, and then I just listen to the Stars and all these other people. And if Lou and Tom are saying it, then I just figure they know what they're talking about.
You know, and there's something to the nature of what they're sharing. So, for example, the majority of To the Stars is sharing what they're finding in their research and investigation. So people like Lou, Chris Mellon, Steve Justice are more careful. Hal Puthoff, who barely ever talks publicly, they're more careful about what they're saying. However, others like Davis is getting he's willing to share rumors, which is fair. You know, he's an educated person. He's capable of sharing what is more credible, and I think we should pay attention to what Davis has said. And then you've got Tom, and Tom is not only sharing rumors, he's sharing his personal opinions and his own assumptions or skeptic or kind of his what he thinks is going on by connecting his own dots. So it's less based on research, but that also I think makes Tom more susceptible to putting forth messages that he's given to put forth. So he would be more susceptible to possibly putting out information that insiders may want out. So that's kind of one thing that he's got to be careful with too. But that means of all the people, you got to take his information with a little more grain of salt, because it's also his interpretation of what things are going on and what role they want him to play. I think one indication where he may have gotten it wrong was in those WikiLeaks when John Podesta had arranged that meeting, and it was McCaslin, I believe, who you saw this email from Tom right after their meeting that said, hey, McCaslin was saying he was skeptical in that meeting, but he's not as skeptical as he alluded to. So that just shows that maybe Tom misinterpreted some of what McCaslin had told him earlier, or maybe even went too far in sharing more than McCaslin wanted to share. But the point being that there's levels of credibility with all of the sourcing of this information.
And people change their mind over time.
Yeah, that's a really good point, too. And we don't know. Some of these guys, generals and otherwise, they have opinions, too, that aren't necessarily based in what they know, but what they believe to be true. So that's the other side. But I think you all have great points. And one great point that you all make is when people talk about this narrative, they're pushing a negative narrative that fits their agenda, is that Davis has been around for a long time. So if he's sharing that he believes that there's this isn't good, that he believes there's aliens and his findings are that they're not nice, then this is based off of years and years of gathering information. So, but like you said, who knows what the truth is? And what we have coming up, and let's talk about this next, is these negative experiences that happened in Brazil that I think they're going to cover in the show.
Oh, I did not know they were.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I'm looking forward to that then big time, because I think Colares is one of the most amazing cases.
Can you summarize it kind of and summarize that case a bit for us?
I don't know if I can. I'll try, though. Basically, over, what was it, like a month or something like that. I'll probably get some facts wrong here. Basically, UFOs just kept coming and visiting various areas of Brazil. It wasn't just Colares Island. Valet was the main investigator on this after the fact. It happened so much that the Brazilian military was called in. Also, a lot of journalists were called in. What I find really interesting is how Puthoff and other people keep bringing it up. Puthoff says that, I think there was like 14 or 16 hours of footage. There's data. There's everything. Various people have also investigated it. I've been doing a deep dive on this, actually, and I'm planning to come out with a blog about it. But there's also, facts basically that say that Bass and Bigelow later on went and investigated it and kind of took it on a different angle. Also, one thing that seems to legit happen was people died, maybe like 10 or 12. People were getting shot with beams of light. craziest things that you'll ever hear. I have no idea why there hasn't been some big movie about it. It seems like it'd be like a really huge blockbuster, but I don't know if this is a something they're trying to put out there more. But yeah, I didn't know Unidentified was going to cover that, so I'm pretty excited about that.
I don't know it for 100%, but I'm pretty sure. But yeah, go ahead. Did you others want to add to that? Nope, he's got it.
It's like, it's just weird that kind of stuff's happened in Brazil, and we don't have anything really close to that here. I mean, we have people, Cass Landrum, but that was, that seemed like a side effect, like, from the technology. It didn't seem like it was an overt attack like in Brazil. But so, I mean, if they're going to cover that negative case, that kind of stuff, they should try to, I don't know if they're going to cover anything positive, because there are people that claim, first of all, you got the abductees in the free report, which is almost all positive experiences. And then you have people saying that they were healed with their UFO encounters, people healed of cancer, that pets, on the brink of death coming back. So it's like, there's positive stuff too. I don't know if, is Unidentified just going to focus on the negative aspect of this?
I've been told that there was other similar incidents to Colaris around the world, and we just don't know about them. So I find that pretty interesting.
Well, we know they're going to cover Rendlesham, and I did ask Lou about that, and I even, added that, hey, in the New York Times it said you were looking at people who had physical effects from encounters. Is that the aspect you're going to cover in Rendlesham? And he kind of sidestepped it and said you're going to have to wait to see in the episode. But he didn't deny it. To me, I think they are going to go there with Rendlesham. And, of course, the guys there feel they had negative effects from their encounters with these objects. I don't know if they'll even go into, Burroughs fighting for VA medical benefits related to this encounter, and heart issues he's had that he believes stem from this issue. Something that was speculated in a UK document called the Condine Report that he felt helped him get his VA funding. But there were weird things that happened to his medical and his service records that he had to get help from the Office of John McCain to correct. And finally, he did get his VA benefits. I've got interviews with him and his lawyer on this when that happened. But that may be the angle they cover. We'll have to see. But what's interesting is, Danny, you've written about this. I think we've all kind of kept an eye on this, is this whole project that's gone on where at least Gary Nolan is out of Stanford. It's kind of looking at people who have paranormal experiences to determine why. Is there something in their DNA or their brain or what's going on here? And Eric Davis even admitted he was one of their guinea pigs, and he gave them samples.
So it's amazing work. Kit Green is involved. I don't pretend to understand it all. It's kind of hard for me to talk about it. But that was put out there for a reason. And I think it's really important. And now that it's out there in the public realm, people can build on it.
I think, Alejandro, you sold yourself a little short, because Lou actually did kind of give you a good answer. He said, you'll see, quote, a comprehensive picture of the effects on our men and women in uniform that this phenomenon has, that may include even medical effects. So I'm really looking forward to seeing who they spoke to about that, if it's not just Burroughs.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the Colaris thing, Hal Puthoff told George Knapp last year on Coast to Coast that To the Stars was going to be trying to get some of this video and data and put it out. And I actually asked him about it. And he told me everything that they're doing with that right now is going to be in the show.
That would be amazing.
That's probably where I got it. I remember seeing them.
But however, though, I wasn't sure if he meant that everything with Colaris would be in the show, or just everything, all the information they're trying to put out was going to be in the show and not including Colaris. So I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. But you've got a great point. So is that the aspect they're going to cover Rendlesham in? Maybe. They maybe even cover Day, because Day, of course, has said he feels he's had some emotional effects from the whole encounter.
Right.
Fravor, unfortunately, in Oregon made fun of that a bit, it seems. That's why I wanted Lou to go on the record saying that he backs Day. And, yeah, we wanted to get into that, so we'll get into that now, I guess. But that and that's genuine. I think that it looks bad for Fravor to make fun of, especially any military guys affecting PTSD. I mean, my degree was in industrial and psychology, and it covers those sort of things. But there could be a number of reasons. You don't even have to have the experience personally to experience PTSD from it. So, but an experience where your job is to look and understand what all the aircraft are in your arena, and you're hypersensitive to that, as Day seems to be. I think that was reflected in the show last night. Kevin Day was part of it. That would be shocking if you see this crazy stuff going on your radar screens, and then you send some jets in, which is interesting too, that Fravor in the show did admit that the Princeton did, zero them in, or at least send them to go look at the Tic Tac, and I could see how someone would be affected. That nobody knows what this is, and you've got this giant secret that there's these crazy things flying around, and you can't talk to anybody, or nobody takes it seriously. That would be world changing.
Well, that makes me wonder if Fravor is aware of some of the stuff that Kevin Day has said outside of the emotional aspect to it. When I did my interview with him, he kind of alluded to heightened senses of abilities, which was kind of weird considering he wasn't, abducted or isn't a quote unquote experiencer. So it's kind of weird that Kevin has these claims of, without having these experiences that others have, to kind of have some of the same reaction. And I'm not discrediting, what he said at all, because I really appreciate him coming forward. So it's just interesting if Fravor knows anything about that, or is, just kind of making comments on, like you said, like the PTSD thing, which would be kind of a really bad look, I think.
It was a really bad look. It was the worst. When I was listening to that, I was so mad that he was doing that, because I met all the guys down at UFO MegaCon, and Kevin's a great guy. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what he's going through, but to just even bring up PTSD at all was just, like you said, it's such a bad look. Why even go there? Just don't even talk about it. And the other thing is, like, we have PJUs who said his data bricks were confiscated. I totally 100% believe him. He said there's other witnesses. He mentioned Roger, who actually had to sign NDAs. And then Jason Turner, to me, is a really important witness. He claims there was a 7 to 10 minute video of the Tic Tac, and he says there are other people in the room that saw it, and he's not going to name them because he wants to leave it up to them, obviously, if they don't want to come forward. If that's true, I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean, and I know Fravor said, nope, this is it. This is the only video. So hopefully in the future we see more witnesses. But they need to feel comfortable coming forward. What won't help that is somebody like Fravor poking fun at PTSD, and he's basically calling these guys liars. And that's, if I'm a witness, I'm like, you know what? And I see that, I'm not coming forward. I don't need that in my life. I don't need to be called a liar. So I'm just going to shut up. That's
a great point.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm looking back actually right now in my interview with Day, and one of the things that he's all of a sudden privy to is the idea of human post effects. And his quote he said to me was, concerning human post effects and what might happen when 7 billion people are suddenly smarter, more present, are able to heal and can manifest things. So it's pretty interesting with someone with no prior knowledge to this, has a sighting and is able to kind of read up on it to kind of, learn about just the, besides the nuts and bolts of a UFO sighting. So I commend Kevin for that, about, kind of reading up on Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis and all this, because he knows the stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, what happens over time is memory does change. Our memory is certainly very fallible, especially, even after something happens, the longer time goes, exponentially we begin to forget and even get false memories. Our memory is malleable, where it can be influenced by things that we hear later on. And that's why I'm really careful with witnesses, because, it's just hard, especially something that happened 15 years ago, that you're going to remember all the details accurately, and you could innocently be remembering things wrong. There's been so many studies around this. So we don't know what influences have happened that maybe, or things that are being, connected to that experience that actually aren't connected to that experience. So we don't know. But I think that for me, that Lou put it really well when he answered my question. He said, Fravor knows what he knows. Day knows what he knows. They were in two different places. So even, when I first asked Lou about this, he said, I don't ask them what they know about things they don't directly experience because I don't care. All I want to know is, what did you deal with? What did you see? What is your first-hand experience? Which I thought was a great response because that makes sense. I mean, that's where they would be the authority on their first-hand experiences, not what someone else is doing. And you hear Lou often saying, I don't know, I wasn't there. Ask him, ask them. I don't know. Why are you asking me what someone else did? So that makes a lot of sense. And in this case, Day has his first-hand experience, and Fravor has his. But the other witnesses, this whole, what we saw on the show last night, this tic-tac or this object that went under the water and then traveled at these incredible speeds, that was kind of a holy caca moment, I feel, probably for a lot of people in this show.
And it's funny, Jeremy Corbell interviewed a witness who says he was there, Trevor, and he basically said it went under the water. So it's not just one person. It's not just Gary Voorhees saying that. I know he heard it. He said he heard it from a sonar tech. And that same witness said he saw a different type of video where it was actually UFO shaped, like flying saucer. So I don't know. Maybe hopefully we'll hear from Trevor one day. Maybe he'll be in the show because Jeremy Corbell alluded to. He didn't say that. He said just pay attention. He brought it up again. Just remember what this person said. I don't know if it was in reference to what Gary Voorhees found out about as far as underwater, the sonar contact, or if Trevor's going to be on the show.
Yeah, they might be.
I don't think he is. I don't think Trevor is on the show, but I could be remembering wrong. I did want to say that, Lou has kind of stuck to the facts as far as Kevin Day's experience. You guys may know better than me for off the record comments, but he hasn't spoken about, that I've heard, about anything that happened after the Nimitz encounters to the guys personally. I also thought it was really interesting that they included Gary Voorhees' story about how the data was taken. Right. That's been denied by some other people, but they put it in. They put it in the show. One other thing I can clear up a little bit is, George Knapp's gotten a little bit of flack because he was the one interviewing Fravor, and he made that comment that the stories are BS. I can tell you that isn't George Knapp's opinion. He was reporting, and it kind of sounds like it when you listen to it, but he was reporting what Fravor was saying. So it was more of a quote of Fravor, and George Knapp was, basically just being a journalist and trying to get him to comment on what he was saying.
There's some insight there, too, because the way George asked the question, and I know this got some people upset. Joe, you got upset. I think I told you because I was there. And, immediately I go up there and George is all excited and we're like little schoolgirls. He's like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And we're talking about all the stuff that he talked about and the questions and even more that Fravor had told them offline. But so we were all excited about it and, geeking out on all of this. But he did something, it's kind of like, I can't remember the name. It's kind of like mirroring. So in other words, where you portray the sentiment of the person you're interviewing so that you are trying to get them there again. So essentially, Fravor at some point expressed to George in the way that George was expressing to him what he had felt about the other witnesses, and George was trying to get him back there to express, honestly in front of this crowd what he had expressed to George earlier. So George is asking the question in the manner those answers were given him to try to elicit that same, kind of response from Fravor, which it did. I don't know, in a way, I'm not sure it was completely fair, but to be honest, because it would have been fair to challenge Fravor on the spot there. I think that would have been fair for the other witnesses if someone would have done that. But and that didn't happen. They kind of moved on to other topics because there was so much more to talk about. But the primary witness that, of course, Jeremy and George have talked to is Fravor. So a lot of what they are collecting or seeing is kind of influenced by Fravor's input. You know what I mean?
All right, I know. And, I don't think either one of them spoke with any of the four witnesses at MegaCon. So, their only witness that they've spoken to, I believe, is Fravor, and Jeremy's spoken to some other people. But I understand that's what George's intention was, but to me, that's not how it came across. So I said, you know what? Maybe it's just me. So I took it and I played it for a friend, and she's like, no, that's not how it sounds. It sounds like he's calling it bullshit and BS. Sorry. But, George has got the track record, so I believe that wasn't his intention. But yeah, it would have been nice. I would love to have those guys. I think would love to meet with Fravor and talk about it, and I'd love to be able to see if they can, hash it out and talk about stuff, because he wasn't on the prints, and he couldn't be everywhere at the same time. I know he thinks that a lot of stuff would have come to him, but as PJU said, there's some stuff that he knew that there's no way Fravor would know about it unless he was read into something. It was so classified. Like the data bricks, they were very classified, and unless Fravor had a need to know, he wouldn't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And just for the record, George has he interviewed Kevin Day on Coast to Coast. He promoted Dave Beatty, the Nimitz Encounters on Coast to Coast. So I just wanted to mention that too.
Yeah. And George is human. And he's gathering information just like we are. And it's helpful that people are grabbing information from other angles. But, because I had talked to him about this. And I know afterwards others had talked to him about this too. So he got more education, I think, afterwards on all of this as well. So who knows what he thinks now? He may think, I'm sure he does think something totally different, because we're all learning as we go here. So we've gone quite a bit over, but I want to give you all a chance to talk about any other items you want to talk about. So why don't we go around and maybe let's start with Joe. Is there something else you want to bring up that to the group?
Let's see. I really was amazed that when Christopher Mellon was on Fox Radio, the guy brought up Area 51, the interviewer, and Mellon talked about how there's 8 members of Congress stipulated by law. It's Section 119 of Title 10. And no, Danny, I have not looked it up yet. I would love to. I actually want to read that. But He said, if they ask a question about even the most secretive SAP programs, they're entitled to a straight answer from the Department of Defense. But then he says, yeah, they're entitled to a straight answer in theory. And I just thought I'm like, he's bringing up in theory. He put that in there. And it's like, yeah, they should be able to get information, but I don't think that's the way it works on some of these programs. And that's when I thought about some of the SAP crash retrieval bodies programs. Yeah, that Greer has talked about, Mitchell's talked about, and the Eric Davis leak it's mentioned with Admiral Wilson, that even Admiral Wilson couldn't get this information. So it kind of like, to me, I thought that, and I know I'm extrapolating here. I'm speculating that's what Mellon was getting at, but he seemed to have it ready, that he was talking about Section 119 and the most secretive, sensitive SAPs. I don't know what you guys think, but to me that was really interesting. One of the most interesting aspects of this past week, which was an amazing week for us.
I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's. I agree, it's crazy. It was really crazy. It was a historic comment, really.
Yeah, what I'll add to that, and this will be my talking point, what I want to end with, I think it's interesting, too, to see going forward which current senators are going to, we're going to see who are the ones who are read in, or even with the upcoming elections, just to see who's interested in this topic besides Andrew Yang, obviously, but just to see some of the incoming freshman members of the House, just to see how much they know and what their interest is. Because I think, even though this is the start, the conversations and potentially could lead to congressional hearings and people being read in, I think this is the start of it. But at the same time, I think it's not going to be a priority going into 2020. But I think it's a start, which is still good.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, and Danny's kind of written some stuff down this route, I know, is that two things. That Chris Mellon, I think he knew it so well because that was part of his job. Right. When he was doing this stuff in the White House. So I think it probably would have even been his job. Hey, we want to know this. Go find it out. So what Chris Mellon knows is people may or may not share it with them. And if they have some inkling of a notion that something's going on that's not being shared with them, that means they're going to have to go to battle and say, no, we want this information, and then fight the fight to get it, and maybe not get it. Who knows, how these battles might go on in the background. But that, like he says, they should share it. But who knows if they will? We might have to go to bat to try to get it, or we might just say, "All right, I guess we're screwed. We're not going to get the answers." But another interesting thing about that is that Harry Reid, I'm positive he was, as far as intelligence, part of that Gang of Eight that I believe that Mellon's referring to. So Harry Reid would have been one of those people. So Chris Mellon might be telling us something else. Why is Harry Reid starting AATIP to look into some of this stuff, trying to get AATIP, or he used a term by them, AATIP, SAP access to be able to find that information out, when Harry Reid had the ability to find that out himself? So maybe he felt he wasn't getting all the answers that he was supposed to get. And some people have suggested that AATIP might have been partially kind of especially this SAP. Well, he even mentioned that there's discussion about this. The whole reason they wanted the SAP status was so they could get access to information in other special access programs. So it seems like there was a lot of information that the AATIP was a tool to get more information on what was out there. But of course, they were denied SAP access. And the big question for me is, Harry Reid, did you go ask these questions? And were you denied information? What did you try to find on your own, given the power of your office, which is huge? I mean, he was he was a very important person.
That's a great point. And I mentioned to him some of the other programs and if they were located in a special access program, and he said they'd have to be. And that interview George Knapp did with him, it's like he mentioned other programs and he gave that little sly smile, which I tweeted out. I was like, what is he trying to tell us? So, yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So what does Harry Reid know?
What does he really know?
But there's other players in this that just are not going to share what they know. I mean, Harry Reid is tight-lipped. Bob Bigelow, I mean, he rarely gives any interviews and claims to know there's aliens here, but won't share why he believes that. Hal Puthoff is very good at holding stuff close to the vest. Fortunately, we have people like Eric Davis who once you get him going, it's hard to get him to stop. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. This is just so interesting. We're getting so much information, and it's funny because, like I talked about with George Knapp, he's someone who really geeks out on. He gets so excited, like we do, about all this stuff. It's like, well, just imagine some of these guys trying to get this information for literally decades, and now there's this huge avalanche of flow of information. How amazing that would be.
And speaking of information coming out, I wrote a blog about DeLonge and Mellon comments yesterday that I published. DeLonge is saying that towards the end of the series, we're going to see current program agents.
Right.
They're not going to show their face.
Yeah.
I took that as meaning United States. I mean, he didn't clarify that. But that's what we've been wanting this whole time, is to know about the current program going on. Lou has told us that there is a current program going on. It may not be named AATIP, but it's alive and well, I think is how he put it. And so that's going to be really huge. Another thing that I'm just totally flabbergasted by is that Tom and Mellon have both talked about NATO allies coming forward and talking about experiences. I have some of the quotes right here. Tom said, "You will see the intelligence agents of other NATO allies," towards the end of the show. And then Mellon said, in fact, as our investigation unfolds over the first 6 episodes this season, we're going to be presenting information from a NATO ally that's been having very similar experiences. So, what if we get a New York Times level, story about another country? I'm just speculating here, but something big may come about with this, and I think everyone really needs to pay attention to that.
Yeah, well, I think it's France. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that speculation, I think it's warranted because they had cameras with them when they were in Rome as well. So when they did the conference in Rome, So I think, it's definitely a European nation for sure. And I think it's going to be collaborated with another article, not where they did it on purpose, but I think everything is timed. If one of the last episodes is when this is revealed, I think they're definitely then working side by side with some of these governments in terms of when the stuff gets out there to kind of parallel with when the episode airs.
Mm-hmm.
I hope there's video.
Yeah, I think I would be more excited if it's Italy, but they've mentioned France before. I think it might be France. The reason I'd be excited if it's Italy because we haven't heard as much from them historically, whereas we've heard a lot from France because they have their own official UFO organization that's been going since the 70s. That was Jacques Vallée had a role in getting that rolling, actually.
And if we do get to see current members of whatever the program is called, I mean, that's probably one of the more exciting things I can think of. I cannot wait for that. And the naysayers, what are they going to say? These people are lying. They're not part of the program. The program exists now, and these guys are saying we are investigating UFOs, encounters with the military, and it's happening right now. It's going to shut up a lot of those naysayers.
Mm-hmm.
It may also change how the public views this, because when they read the New York Times article, AATIP was in the past, even though we know it was still going on, but that, it was basically said in a lot of these media outlets that it was over with. And I think that kind of put people's minds at ease in a way. But what if the public now knows there's a current program investigating things right now as we speak? And I think that may change how people view the subject.
Mm-hmm. If they don't do it, yep. If they don't do it, I can just picture Danny taking screenshots of every person in the last few episodes and trying to figure out who all these people are. But,
I'm assuming they're going to be in silhouette. I would think they're not going to show their faces. I think that's what DeLonge said, right?
Danny?
Yeah. He said they're not going to show their faces. But hey, we're going to get their side profile.
Oh yeah, I'll take them. I'll be happy with voices.
Yep. So finally, predictions. Anybody got a prediction? I got one. My prediction is we will hear more clarification from the DoD, backtracking even more from their statements. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Awesome.
I mean, I personally have shared information with Sherwood, and I know he's read it because I know he only got a couple emails that day on this, and I haven't begun my campaign to really bug him to get more information, but I know I'm not the only one who shared information, and of course, like I said, I'm the runt of the litter. I don't have even KLAS would have more pull that George Knapp works with, but people like Bender with Politico, who says essentially that he's looking for some clarification. Politico has a lot of clout. They're going to get a response of some sort. So I'm sure that we'll get even more clarification there. Any other predictions?
I'm just going by these comments. So yeah, I'm just waiting for the program, the current program, and the NATO thing.
Yep.
I don't have a prediction, but I do have. Can I bring up one other thing because I really want to get you guys your take on this? Any idea? The New York Times has now written several articles on this. Not one mention of OSAP, and I know they would like to get people who are actually in the program so they can get so they can get an interview with one of those people, and they may be really difficult to get it. But I would think they would at least mention, and that's how the program started, because nobody really, besides us, because we follow it so closely, people who are just getting into this subject, they have no idea that it started with Skinwalker Ranch and the DIA scientists, according to George Knapp, having the experience at the ranch, and that started everything, and nobody really knows about that unless, like I said, you're obsessed with the subject like we are. Any ideas why they haven't gone there?
What?
I would argue that though they haven't really gone there yet because it hasn't. The current story, that the most recent one, it hasn't really went to that specific story. I think they're doing an all-encompassing story about the beginning of the program. Then yes, I think that would be included. But I think just from what the previous story was talking about a specific incident. So they didn't go too far into the background of it.
I think it's because it's so sticky and weird. What the heck was Skinwalker? It's a really difficult situation to deal with. And like a lot of the skeptics complain, they didn't find anything. All they left with was some anecdotal stories and nothing hard. I mean, these are credible people. I think they're great stories and people you can believe. But so what do you cover, especially that's credible there, is tough. And the New York Times, they were actually the first, before George Knapp came out, to say it was a DIA agent who helped inspire all of this. But they said the DIA agent wanted to meet Bigelow on a ranch in Utah that is like a laboratory, used as a laboratory for Bigelow and his paranormal investigations. That's how they framed it. Now, no doubt, Leslie Kean and I'm sure Ralph Blumenthal knew what that ranch really was, but they didn't go there in that first story. When I asked Leslie Kean about it, she said, well, Lou only told me about AATIP, so all we covered was AATIP, which makes sense. And Lou's even said, I didn't want to share anything about, he keeps saying that, OSAP. I didn't work on OSAP. I worked on AATIP. So I think that's a lot of it. Of course, there's a lot of access to OSAP that they can have because they just have to talk to the Bigelow people, Davis, Hal Puthoff, who all were part of that investigation and part of ASAP. So they're OSAP. So there's people they can talk to do a story, but it's tough. What would be the story? I mean, essentially it would be a recap of Skinwalker, which is just weird and doesn't have kind of the gravitas of any real hard findings.
I wouldn't expect them to go into Skinwalker, just the facts of that a DIA scientist actually had an experience and that started everything. Just that. I mean, that's how everything began, and it's nowhere to be reported. It's not really reported anywhere. Although you said they did mention the DIA scientists, which I forgot about.
Yeah,
I would love to see a deep dive into OSAP. The thing is, we still don't know a lot about it. A lot of it is guarded and classified, or whatever you would call it. And even with Skinwalker, George Knapp said we know about 1% of what happened there. Or what's going on there, especially now. So there's just a whole lot that's behind the scenes. Everyone thinks that OSAP and AATIP was mainly the DIRGs, and George Knapp has also commented that was barely part of it. That they had 50 employees investigating, and there's all this other stuff that we don't know about OSAP. I just hope it comes out, at least for us, so we can find out more.
I want to know what the DIA guy's experience was. I'm so extremely interested in what that might have been.
I could tell you what Jeremy Corbell said. I was actually I really want to write a blog about this, but so maybe I should save it for the blog. But all right, I'll let you know what Jeremy said. I know what George said. George said he was in the corner and he looked over somebody's shoulder and he saw something up, over somebody's shoulder. And I never got details. And then one of the interviews, I don't remember which one it was, Jeremy Corbell said that he saw now I got to think. You guys talk about something. I will try to remember exactly what he said.
Oh, man, this is exciting. I want to know.
It was something scary. It was like an orb, or I don't remember what it was, a shadow person.
Well, and what's interesting
like
is nothing had happened for years. I mean, of course, you guys have known this. We've heard George talk about that, but that the phenomena was dormant for years, and then this guy shows up and something happens, and then here we are with a television program about a whole government project that was based off of because this event happened. So, I'm thinking as I'm talking right now, a lot of the guys like George or John Alexander calls this a sentient precognitive phenomenon, and this phenomenon is the reason OSAP and AATIP and the television show Unidentified and Lou got all of what we're talking about on this show is all started from this friggin' event that hopefully Mike can remember what it was.
That's an amazing point. You're right.
I can't remember right now. I promise. I'm not holding back.
Well, you know what? Let's save it for the blog. As much as I'd like for you to share it, go ahead and write the blog and we'll just plug. So punkrockandufos.com is Mike's blog where you'll be able to get that. Danny just talked about...
Oh, Joe's. That's going to be on Joe's.
Oh, Joe, this is Joe. I'm sorry.
That'll be on ufojoe.net if I can remember. I have it written down somewhere, and I will write about it.
Oh, I got your voices mixed up. You guys have it similar. So, Joe, check out ufojoe.net, and just save it for your blog. This will plug your blog, so people have to watch UFO Joe.
And it's not some crazy, like an alien, like somebody told me, oh, it's an alien. I'm like, no, it's more it's more scientific. It's more like geometric shape type thing, and I'll figure it out.
But we're all on Twitter. Some people don't like Twitter. You got to get on Twitter. I mean, especially every reporter knows that's where all the news is happening. Of course, when you're watching the news, they're all talking about somebody tweeted this, of course, the president, but somebody tweeted this, somebody tweeted that. But, you know, all of these guys are on Twitter and they're sharing all of their stories. They're all, you know, you guys, I'll tell you all right now, you're doing the best work in this field. You guys are digging and finding the most important information and getting those stories out there. I'm just so thrilled that you all are paying attention to this and writing your blogs, because you're really doing some awesome work out there. And I highly recommend everybody check out these guys' blogs. Of course, I'll have links to all of them in the show notes. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you.
I always say this: you're a great role model for us, and thank you for what you do. You've been doing it a lot of years.
Well, it's a thrill. I think we all feel it. It's a lot of fun. So it's a privilege, and it's even more of a privilege to have people like you in here also, especially when we're getting attacked by knuckleheads who should know better and do know better. So what can you do? But thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for letting me be in this room with a bunch of heavyweights. So appreciate it.
Actually, I've lost a lot of weight. I've been on the keto diet. Thank you so much to Mike Damante of Punk Rock and UFOs, Danny Silva of the Silver Record, and Joe Murgia of UFO Joe for joining us today. We're going to have links at the bottom in the show notes to all of their pages, and I would suggest you definitely follow these guys and their social media, especially Twitter. We talked about this. Twitter is where it's happening, man. Brian Bender's on there. That's where news people are. There's just a lot going on. You get boom, boom, up to the minute information on what's going down. So I highly advise you follow us all on Twitter. In fact, you can see some of these guys, you know, getting in there and having these little verbal battles with well, I guess these would be textual battles with some of the other detractors in there. But lots of exciting stuff going on with these guys. I highly recommend that you follow them, because there's lots of interesting stuff that goes on that falls through the cracks that I don't catch that these guys do. So check them out. Otherwise, I do want to also tell you, be sure to check out our interviews if you haven't. My interview and Martin Willis with Podcast UFO, his interview with Luis Elizondo. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of information to come out that at least, you know, answer some of the questions that we've been dying to ask. So we were able to get some great information out on those. Otherwise, I want to give you some UFO Congress updates. We're going to have Kevin Day at the event. So we just announced that. Kevin Day was a radar operator. You can see him in the latest episode of Unidentified. Very cool guy. Of course, I interviewed him a few weeks ago, but you'll be able to meet him, ask your own questions of him at the conference. That's going to be great. Another person we added is James Fox. Of course, I've had him on the show quite a bit, so those of you who have been listening for a while know him well. He created what are some of the best documentaries, most credible documentaries out there on the topic, Out of the Blue, and I Know What I Saw, and he's got a new one coming out. When you hear who's been involved with this new project, it will blow your mind. I get all of these secrets, and I'm always dying to share this stuff with you guys. But what I can share is he's interviewed some of the most incredible people that you could regarding this issue. So if you sat down and you thought, you know, I would love to hear from this person or that person, he's interviewed them. So this next documentary is going to be incredible, and he'll be able to share information about it. And it's going to come out soon after the UFO Congress. So you're going to get a heads up on all of the cool stuff that's in there at the UFO Congress. Just go to ufocongress.com to register. Use the code SAVE25. That's uppercase SAVE25. When you're checking out, you'll get $25 off. I'm hooking you up, dudes. You got to come. And plus, I'd love to see you. So come in and say hi. It's going to be a ton of fun. That's September 4th through the 8th in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. So ufocongress.com. Otherwise, I guess that is about it for now. Be sure to join us next week. We've got a great show. It's going to be Nick Pope, who worked for the Ministry of Defense at their UFO desk, and he's always got great insights into all of what's going down with all of this, because he's got experience working in the government for this type of thing. He also will be talking to us about these new UK UFO documents that have been published. So it's like, they said that they released them all, but they didn't. So find out more about these files next week. I want to thank Martin Willis of Podcast UFO for joining us at the beginning of the show with the news. I want to thank Caleb Hanks for the intro and the outro music of the show. He's got great stuff. Sometimes people ask about his music because they love it so much. I do too. If you go to the Open Minds UFO radio site at openminds.tv, you'll be able to see a link to his stuff. He posts a lot of his music for free, and it's all really good stuff. I also want to thank Systematics for the bumper music, and I want to thank you, the listeners, for being here once again. Until next week, adios muchachos.